Hi everybody, welcome back. So it's been a couple of weeks since I posted my last lesson, so I hope you enjoy. And for today, the lesson should only be, it's half, right? It's half of one lesson so that it's not overwhelming. It's probably going to be somewhere between 30 to 40 minutes long. Same thing, if you want to make this lesson a little more engaging, have someone to bounce ideas off of. And the good news is today, the only member of my family watching this lesson is my cat. So the level of disruption should be minimal as long as my cat, named Kitty, does not walk on the screen or do anything of that sort. Okay, so let's begin. This lesson discusses invasive species, native species, pollution, etc. So for tomorrow, I'll post our pollution part of the lesson, but today we're going to be focusing on invasive or non-native species, okay? Because those terms, non-native, invasive, they sound very similar, but they do have one fundamental difference between the two, which I will talk about today. Okay, so let's go into non-native species. What is a non-native species? How would you describe this? So anytime you call something non-native, it is just simply not from that area and therefore does not belong in the specific ecosystem, okay? So it is not from that area, and so it is a species that doesn't belong in that specific ecosystem. So then how do they get there? So you know for a fact, if you look around at Canada, large proportion of the animal species, the plant species that we see are considered non-native. So how did they get there? So what is introducing them here? Think about it. What is the fundamental similarity between every single lesson in ecology? Ironically, even though I'm supposed to be talking about just natural ecosystems, half the time I'm in fact talking about humans, because we are the ones there that are changing the ecosystems, okay? Creating the issues that need to be discussed, such as those that you talked about during your rant, okay? When we did the managing candy activity. So humans can introduce non-native species. A lot of the times they are deliberately introduced, and yes, sometimes they are accidentally. So let's first think about deliberately. In general, why are we purposely bringing some non-native animals and plants over to Canada? Why do humans do this? So deliberately, we're doing something. We're trying to solve some sort of problem, whether it's providing a wider variety of food resources that we can eat. Okay. What else? Why else might we introduce them? So yes, we might introduce them for agriculture purposes, livestock. Sometimes we can introduce them to try to control another species, which unfortunately kind of creates like a cyclical domino effect. You introduce a new species to control the other new species that was introduced, okay? We can introduce them on purpose for hunting purposes. And then at times we introduce some plants or animals just because they're fun for us, whether it's domesticated cats or pretty little flowers, okay? So let's write some of these down. You'll probably need to pause. Let's go over them again. Sometimes we will purposely introduce a new species to try to control another. So at one point, a certain species of beetle kind of became rampant, and so they introduced the toad. Whether they are needed by hunters for kind of fun, I guess. Any type of pets. The big ones, livestock, agriculture. And a good example, specific one, is the purple loosestrife. It was purposely brought here because it is said to have some medicinal values, but it's also quite pretty. So it was introduced for its decorative value. Unfortunately, it went from being non-native to invasive, meaning it started to overtake. And so this was now a negative impact of a deliberately introduced species. This is why it is always a risk. Okay, so now pause it, finish writing it all down. Okay, so now how would we introduce a non-native species by accident? Try to think about how things are brought into Canada. Okay, maybe talk it over with somebody. The big one, if we could summarize it in one word, what would that one word be? What is the main way that things are brought to Canada? Through travel. Whether it's seeds that are, or like, oh my goodness, spores that are found on pieces of clothing from people that have flown over to Canada, or whether it's accidentally introduced in ballast water in ships. Okay. So accidentally brought over here through travel, in the luggage, on the clothes of people, ships, etc. So if I ever mention the word zebra mussel, I'm sure you know what those are. I don't think you guys were around when it really started to overtake and became a big concern for a lot of people in Ontario. It was overtaking a lot of the Great Lakes. But essentially they came to Canada from the Caspian Sea in Europe. Okay, that is where they emerged from. And they were not deliberately, accidentally brought here through the ballast water from a ship that was traveling from Europe to Canada. So that's an example of an accidental one. Okay, so now let's think about non-native species and why would they be beneficial or how could they be harmful? Okay. So when would they be beneficial? When would they be harmful? So please pause, discuss with somebody. Okay, so the beneficial we've mentioned. So beneficial is in any form of livestock or agriculture, pets, and of course, the last one, which we could term it biological control. So this act of introducing a new species to control another one is called biological control. Okay. So why are some invasive species harmful? Okay. Why are some of them harmful? What can they become if they're coming to, let's say, Ontario, and there's no niche for them in an ecosystem, and they affect that ecosystem in a harmful or negative way? What words could we use for what they have become in that ecosystem? So just like the commensalism, competition, predation, parasitism, they can become predators. They can become competitors, parasites, diseases, any of those things, okay, to the native plants and animals that are in that ecosystem. So they can be very successful predators. They can provide a fierce amount of competition that other species were not prepared for, causing the other species to die out. They can be parasitic in nature or disease-carrying organisms. And essentially what they do is if they become very harmful, they have the ability to start dominating that ecosystem, okay, and essentially overtaking it. So what is the term for a non-native species that has a negative impact? It's no longer just called a non-native species. So this is that one stipulation that creates the difference between non-native and invasive. So if a non-native species has a negative impact, now we will call it invasive. So I'm going to show you a few examples of a few species that became invasive in Canada and the huge toll they took on the economy, on the ecosystems, etc. Okay, so let's begin with one called the emerald ash borer beetle. It originated in Asia, and essentially it's a beetle that is an ash boring beetle. So it makes little holes inside of ash trees. Okay, if there's enough of them, it can kill that tree. And it did, in fact, kill millions of ash trees. I think I've been doing a lot of hiking in the Oak Ridges Moraine, and I think as I was walking with my family, they were saying that there was a breakout of the ash borer beetle there, and so that there are almost no ash trees left. Okay, so I think that's a fact that my dad was saying. Okay, the next one is our zebra mussels, which we discussed already, coming from the Caspian Sea in Europe. Now they have the ability to reproduce extremely quickly. But because they are reproducing, they are essentially competing and causing the death or decreasing the population of this and this. So these are things that native species need to feed on. Okay, so this creates a decrease in the amount of algae and plankton, which native species will feed on. And I mean, zebra mussels, I mean, the native species can't really feed on the zebra mussels because they are covered in that strong shell, okay? Calcium carbonate. So it's not like the death of algae is okay because we have a zebra mussel to replace it. Those same native species will not be able to eat the zebra mussel, okay? Okay, the next one is the Asian long-horned beetle. So it originated in China, and as of now, it has no known predators. So it is like an apex predator, even though it is simply a beetle, okay? So it's causing a great amount of danger to our Canadian forests, okay? And so to try to prevent them from overtaking, they were unable to directly kill that beetle. But what they did is they cut down a huge number of trees to try to prevent the beetle from having a place to proliferate, okay? Which seems a little indirect, but that's the problem when you have really successfully reproducing invasive species. Sometimes you actually have to kill down their food source or cut down their food source so that that species does not overtake the ecosystem. So let's make it a guess. Write it down. How many trees do you think they cut down? How much money do you think that costed to do? Okay. So here's the thing. This is both an ecological and economic impact. So number one, the Asian long-horned beetle caused 27,000 trees to have to get cut down, and it cost $33 million to do it. So that is an economic value that it costs to do this. And also we had to destroy our own natural ecosystem to prevent the longhorn beetle from overtaking. And then the last one. I forgot to put a picture of this up. I would look it up if I were you because they are pretty much everywhere. The purple loosestrife. So this one originated in Europe and Asia, can be found in both. The reason this one is so successful is because one plant can produce a huge quantity of seeds. It has the ability to essentially choke out native plants, and it doesn't provide something. It is also useless because it is unable to provide this. Okay, so give a guess. How many seeds do you think one purple loosestrife plant can provide or produce? Okay, so you see one of these beautiful plants. I want you to imagine that it's making 3 million seeds. And because it's not actually an edible food, herbivores can't really eat it successfully, digest it properly. It's not even a food source. So it's beautiful, but it overtakes the other plants. Other plants cannot grow when it is there, and it is not even a useful food source. So this is a perfect example of an invasive species. So like usual, I like to post pictures that like help you remember stuff. So this here is what? Okay, zebra mussels. But to be honest, when they become invasive, they start to overtake and look something like that. They cover everything, okay? Okay, so now we've discussed, again, a bunch of the negative impacts, but try to categorize them. What are the different ways, 4 major ways that invasive species can have an impact? They can have an impact on this, or in this way, in this way. So try to come up with 4 examples. Pause it, write down 4 examples, and I will take them up. Okay. So the 4 major types of impacts is the first one that we've discussed already, ecological, right? So we discussed $33 million lost by cutting down 27,000 trees. Okay, think about all the money as well lost when all the millions of ash trees died as well. Okay. Sorry, oh my goodness, that what I was just mentioning was economic, not ecological. Ecological is any kind of impact on the ecosystem, food web, the killing of other organisms, etc. This one seems a little oversimplified or not that big of a deal, but it is impactful on our economy as well when it comes to tourism. Okay, so for example, like the Great Lakes, when they got overtaken by zebra mussels, people would stop swimming in them. Okay, as well, if boats need to pass through narrow waterways, sometimes imagine you have zebra mussels overtaking that waterway. Sometimes boats can't even pass through certain waterways because they're overtaken and overgrown, affecting both our economic industry and our tourism industry. And of course, if any of these non-native species are carriers of disease, they can impact our health. Okay. So in your next slide, I want you to write down these 4 impacts on the side. So to the left, I want you to write type of impact: ecological, economic, tourism, health. So please do that now. The next table looks like that. Okay, but all in one page. So ecological, economic, tourism, health. Pause my video and spend a minute categorizing. The examples I've already given you can fall easily into ecological, economic, tourism, and you might need to make up one based on your own knowledge for health, okay? So pause the video, come up with some examples, and we're going to fill in the blanks in a second. Okay, so for ecological, a good example is the zebra mussel. So this one, if at any time I call it ecological, it is competing with, it's either a competitor or a predator. So it is either competing with or feeding on native species, affecting the native species population, typically causing the population of the native species to decline or drop. And of course, they're going to cause an imbalance in the whole ecosystem. And yes, the ecosystem will slowly start to recover and a new stabilization will occur with the invasive species inside of that ecosystem. Although keep in mind, even though it balances out, it is not the natural ecosystem that should be in that area, and nor is it typically ideal for all organisms. Okay, it can affect nutrient cycles, energy flow. Again, so imagine an overwhelming amount of purple loosestrife could go in that example too, impacting energy flow because now there are less producers for the herbivores to choose from, okay? Okay, the economic, a good one would be the ash borer beetle, okay? That's our 33, well actually no, ash borer beetle and the Asian longhorn beetle is our $33 million cost, okay? So whenever they cause damage to forests or crops, it will cause financial losses. And of course, it all goes hand in hand. Tourism and disease, if any of these impacts on tourism or disease destroy livestock or crops or harm trees, all of these will go back to being an economic impact as well. The next one is our tourism. So this one I've mentioned before. We can refer to zebra mussels, purple loosestrife, both of those work. So viewing of wildlife, fishing quality, water recreation, all of these have been directly impacted by zebra mussels. Any waterways that motorboats or even ships want to pass through can be impacted as well. And it can be so overtaken that boats may not even be able to pass. And then for health, if a species causes disease. Okay, so for example, mosquitoes, okay, that are, they have the Plasmodium virus within them, okay? Sorry, that's something for grade 11, I think, or 12. But anyway, with the ability to create West Nile virus. And then the problem is, half of the time, the negative impact is our attempts to control these species by using pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. All of this is a source of pollution and our health risks. Okay, and that will be a whole other lesson. So in this lesson, we introduce why are there species that are issues for ecosystems? And in another lesson, we're going to discuss, okay, so how exactly are we controlling them? And once we control them, what is the problem with the way we choose to control them? So very briefly, one more picture to help you remember this forever. All right, so very briefly, let's quickly introduce how we control these species. Oh, yikes, don't look at that. I want you to discuss with a partner. Can you imagine? So a species is growing out of control, or an insect is reproducing extremely quickly, or a predator is overtaking an ecosystem. What are 3 general ways that we could use to try to prevent them from overtaking? What would we do? Think about how to categorize 3 different ways that we could control these species. Okay, pause the lesson, discuss. Okay, so anytime you hear me say pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, okay, there's all types, there's molluscicide, okay? This is a type of chemical control. We are using chemicals, okay, to kill invasive species, typically insects or weeds or something like that. The other category is when we do things like make barriers to prevent larger organisms from coming into certain areas, and this is called mechanical control. Even when we cut down those 27,000 trees to prevent access from the beetle, that would also be an example of mechanical control, removing the access. And then our last one would be biological control. So this, unfortunately, is that repetitive cycle. A new species is introduced accidentally or deliberately. It overtakes the ecosystem, and then sometimes we introduce another new species to control its population, and that is biological control. Okay, so chemical control. Now, it's the use of pesticides. So pesticides is the general term. Now, yes, they can be typically effective, but in the next lesson, I think I can't remember if it's the next lesson or 2 lessons down, I will talk about all the side effects of pesticides. The main one being a concept called bioaccumulation, bioamplification. The fact that many pesticides can work their way up food webs, okay, or food chains, and even make its way to us. Okay, our mechanical control. This is some sort of either physical human-made barrier or removing an invasive species or removing the food that they eat. This would be mechanical control. And it's not like a spray of a chemical, so that is the major difference here. We're physically removing them. Okay, so if the plant is invasive, we can cut it down, we can burn it. Invasive animals, we can trap or hunt them. Invasive fish can be blocked by barriers in the waterways. And our last one, controlling introduced species, is our biological control, okay? Where you bring in a new organism to control the one that's out of control, okay? So you're bringing in typically a predator or some sort of infectious agent, but as we know, that can become extremely risky if it passes down to different species that it is not meant to impact. COVID, right? So for example, what we did do was we brought in a beetle called the leaf-eating beetle, again, non-native, to try to control the purple loosestrife, which was also non-native. So purple loosestrife, again, was brought in because it was oh so pretty. And then we brought in a leaf-eating beetle to try to control that plant after it became overwhelmingly overpopulated and prevented herbivores from getting the foods that they needed to survive. So that is it for this lesson. Tomorrow's lesson will be a little bit longer than that, and you will have one assignment to work on this week. It is quite interesting, in my opinion. It's not even on this concept. It is on biodiversity and essentially extinction and all human actions that have caused extinction of different species. And my suggestion to you guys, as you read these articles, I know that you're typically busy, but let me tell you, after a member of my family read the article that I'm about to give you, they spent 2 hours just watching all the YouTube clips they could on it because they found it so shocking to believe that after seeing millions of these organisms flying in the sky, that all it took was, goodness, I can't remember whether it was 50 years or so, and we caused them to become extinct. Okay, so just try to keep the love of learning alive. I'll give you the assignment, and hopefully maybe you'll go into a YouTube binge all about how did humans truly cause the passenger pigeon to become extinct, because there are lots of videos intriguing that are out there. Okay, that's it from me. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and I will see you tomorrow in our next lesson.